this is a new stage, which we're excited about. The only problem is for the short guys, you got chairs that are too high for us, so that's a problem. But I'm joined by some amazing experts in this field. We're going to talk about fiber connectivity to data centers. But before we start talking about our panel, I'm going to have each person introduce himself and their company. So, David?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Tony. I'm David Dzienciol, Chief Customer and Commercial Officer with NEXTDC. We're out of Australia. We're a public company. We're about 15 years old, operate about 17 data centers in Australia and moving into Malaysia and other parts of Asia and Japan.
I'm Leigh Fox. I'm the CEO of altafiber. We own fiber networks in the Midwest and the fiber network across the state of Hawaii.
Hi, I'm Ron Johnson. I have responsibility for optical networking in Nokia, and specifically, I'm the general manager for that team. And a year ago, we closed the acquisition of Infinera, and so I lead the group that includes both Nokia products as well as Infinera products.
Don MacNeil, Chief Revenue Officer at EdgeConneX. We are a design, build, operate data center provider globally. 25 countries, 95 data centers in operation, and more in the pipeline.
Don, we're going to start with you. Sorry, everybody. At 54, I can't read my own writing. This is brutal. So I got to put glasses on.
We feel you.
Hold it out here.
Well, we talked about, we have from here down, it's the least amount of hair going up to the best hair. So,
I'm holding on.
You're holding on. You're looking pretty good, actually. So we've seen a lot of convergence done really around fiber connectivity into data centers. Maybe try to talk about what's happening from a convergence perspective. We've seen this massive growth spurt over the last 18 months. I think you're right in the heart of it, and maybe talk about that, and then we'll just come down the panel, how it's impacting, I think, from an equipment perspective, how it's happening, in various different areas within fiber, and then David obviously can round us out as it starts, as you're growing outside of Australia into Asia. But Donald, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so we have a great advantage here because when EdgeConneX started, the thesis was it was the kind of the beginning of IP basically eating everything, TDM going to IP. Over the top video. So when we set out to form EdgeConneX, it was really all about moving that connectivity and that content and applications to the edge. So from that early stage, we continue to invest very much in these high density edge data centers with tremendous amount of connectivity. We also kind of over the years, fast forward, got into large scale, hyperscale builds around the world. But as you're saying now, Tony, you can see there's kind of two dynamics. One, you think about on the hyperscale campus, right? We talk a lot about training and multi-building campuses. With the advent of AI and the high density within a building or within a campus, just the amount of fiber being deployed within the campus building to building is in and of itself pretty tremendous. But now it starts to, I will say, leak out where connectivity, coming into these large campuses, and we'll probably get a little bit ahead, but as you look out, I can see kind of this next wave of the resurgence, if you will, of the edge, where again, fiber connectivity and fiber diversity, kind of having this next catalyst, if you will, to see a lot more generation of growth.
Please jump in.
Okay. Yeah, I think, from my perspective, going back to when data centers really started to get big and need optical connectivity, there was a lot of consumption of service provider product by the data centers. And at that point, it was very low channel counts, fiber between data centers, a lot of rings, a lot of multi-data center solutions to collect data. Now we're talking about, fast forward 10 years or so, and 15 years maybe, but it takes many, many fibers to connect even big data centers together across long distances. I've even heard some of the big hyperscalers talk about 1,000 fibers with C+L fully loaded between two data centers. And then if you look at what's happening inside the data center, the power and space is becoming too large to fit into one four-wall building, and they're starting to build out into many, many buildings that are connected together with the traffic that used to be contained inside the data center, leveraging IMDD, short reach type optics, now in this scale out environment, they're putting coherent pluggables into the switches that connect the inner workings of the data center together, mostly to scale out these large scale GPU learning models. And we're seeing just a massive increase in the amount of fiber that connects these buildings together and the amount of coherent pluggable capacity it takes to connect those together. And it really haven't been able to scale with the likes of embedded transponders that take hundreds of watts. This opportunity to go to pluggables that fit into the switch or into the router, driving tens of watts instead of hundreds of watts, and getting that all the way up to 800 gigabit now has been a critical part of their ability to continue to scale out the data center.
Yeah, from a fiber perspective, what we've seen is, fiber's become, less of a utility, and it should become more of a strategy, right? And it should be embedded in everything you do from thinking about data center planning, and forward. And then from a local market standpoint, the need for dense, reliable, diverse fiber is just becoming more and more important. You're seeing it in usage trends, you're seeing how enterprise customers react, you're seeing how data center customers react. So from our standpoint, making sure that you focus on carrier grade build, reliability, making sure you pick the right partner, it remains a critical aspect of thinking about fiber in the future, but having forethought in what that partnership looks like and making sure that you're planning well ahead and partnering with the right folks, I think becomes more and more critical.
Yeah, all helpful. To tee something up, which is, I think over the last few years, we got told we want to be here because the network is dictating where we need to be for compute. Now it's where's the power, because we don't have enough in location A, and the network is still very important, but it is the second conversation. If I don't have power, the network won't help me. And particularly in those large loads, we're definitely seeing in Australia, what was a traditional AZ, we're going bigger, we're going further away, even potentially up to 100 kilometers for very large inference and AI loads. And I think that's only gonna, if we look really far out, 3 to 5 years, it's gonna continue to grow, and we're gonna have to have the networks to support that scale of growth that maybe 3 years ago we hadn't thought about.
So everybody's talked about customers, and I think that's obviously what drives our growth. It'd be, in the market today, we've traditionally been focusing on where hyperscale growth is. But I think there's been a bit of a shift in terms of the enterprises are actually coming out with some fairly significant bids. There's a couple of large banks that are out in the market for 150 megawatts. We're gonna see more of that. Those happen primarily in the US right now, but I think that trend is gonna proliferate across the globe. Leigh, maybe kind of talk about how your customer base is adapting to these needs, and then let's everybody jump in. But Leigh, why don't we start with you from a fiber perspective?
Yeah, we're seeing a definite trend on the enterprise side, from customers moving, from the 1 gig to 10 gig to 100 gig circuits, right? And that's definitely an ongoing trend. You've got SMB customers that are now, I think they're more willing to take a little more risk on the pricing side for bandwidth. So you get those guys moving to more GPON. But look, networking, and we're seeing consistent growth and speed. We're seeing on the consumer side, and that's I know it wasn't necessarily your question, but I think it's an end driver, right? We see in our territories an 18% CAGR on just usage, over time, and I think that's not going to slow down, right? So again, I think, and I agree. I think we talked about networking years ago. Now we're talking about power. I'd be interested to see, over the next few years, as power sort of gets solved, does it shift back to networking? Because GPU, that increases on an exponential basis. Networks are linear. Networks take time, so making sure that you're well ahead of planning on the network side. You gotta, as much as we talk about power, don't forget about the networking side. It needs to be talked about just as much as the power, right?
Totally agree. And what I'm hoping is that the data center trend of prices coming back up will happen. And
Valuations on fiber companies are just going to explode. So
I'm happy.
Heard it here.
Yeah.
But I think
So-
your question, Tony, is important because the monetization of AI is going to come from the enterprise.
That's right.
And so I think what we're seeing is enterprises will build some AI that's traditional co-location, and it might be at that scale, or it will be on public AI or shared models or private models on large frontier models. But certainly we talk to a lot of enterprises, they want to focus on the security, and we know that you will get that level of security building and managing some of your own systems. That trend, I think, is going to continue.
Talk a little, David, you have a pretty unique business. It started as an interconnection business 12 years ago, 14 years ago? 14 years ago. You guys have transcended into, you're not homed in on one specific customer base. You're growing in specific markets. It'd be interesting to see your customer trend and how that's changed over the course of the last.
Yeah, we're fortunate that we operate at the edge, and that's different for everybody, but it could be very far edge and it can be very small, very large. And then there's traditional co-location that's changing a lot with AI, with security and other sort of influences. But then we've had to really get into that scale business in order to participate in both very large scale AI, but also for cloud. And then of course, looking at Asia as the next frontier for us to try and bring our brand into that market. So we don't want to be all things to all people, but really focusing on where we can add value in each of those areas, which is unique because you could have a conversation about the network as well as AI, as well as co-location, and then do some scale with that same type of customer. That, I think, helps us and our customers get a good read on what's happening in the market.
Don, very similar transition from the business that you're working in.
Yeah, we have two projects underway with enterprises, specifically in the financial vertical. Few interesting themes. One, think 40 to 50 megawatts. It's less about racks and very much involved in the design and layout. So GPU-based applications that aren't about just simply training large language models, but more specifically, and I will say core to the business with regard to what it is they're doing with the processing. So very, very surprising, but I find that the financial services are probably the most advanced, and bringing quite a bit of expertise, because in their view, these platforms, I'll say, will become very, very strategic to their ongoing business. But and then balance that with, not only is it just all about the proprietary nature of what it is they're building, they also want to be in the key, I'll say, pairing cities, right? So there's the specific component of that as well, where they want to be more in the mainstream for that connectivity, specifically around whether it's the markets or key pairing locations.
And Don, your business started similarly to the way David did, or David's business did, more on the interconnection. Do you think that plays, do they work together? Are they going to work in conjunction to kind of support that enterprise that's moving from a traditional interconnect into that larger type of facility?
Yeah, I think in general, a lot of the focus that has been driving kind of the excitement around the data center component of artificial intelligence and training, to me, it's just a matter of, and I'm sure I'm not alone here, but it's just a matter of time before, after these models get trained and you have to interact with them, right? Very parallel process type environment to now more serial. It's very much similar to what we went through, as I mentioned at the beginning, this transition from TDM to IP and or over the top. I think there's another wave. So connectivity will be absolutely key to being able to interact with these models for purposes of, whether it's a simple consumer inquiry or just, running your business, so to speak.
Ron, you provided, obviously the Infinera, was long haul gear, but you have a lot of product sets. How have you adjusted? You spent a lot of time, obviously, working to accommodate the hyperscalers, but I think there's a fairly significant enterprise base as well. Love to hear about kind of how things are adjusting and where you're spending time.
Yeah, I think in the enterprise space, a lot of them don't own their own infrastructure for long haul or for even metro connectivity. A lot of times they're dependent on service providers, the feedback that I hear from them consistently is being able to deal with a lot of uncertainty and how fast their business is going to scale. Usually behind the curve on that and not always able to forecast it. And then having agile solutions that meet their business needs to turn up services very quickly and get connectivity in the network, that ultimately could mean automating that process, having pre-deployed equipment in place to be able to go and serve those demands. There's a lot of ways, I believe, to solve it, but there's definitely a mismatch between the pace of how circuits have been turned up in the past to what our expectations are of these fast-moving AI requirements. You turn on one new application, one new feature in a network, and it could make the bandwidth explode very quickly. So being able to adjust to that is going to be very important for service providers and wholesale providers to provide that capability.
Ron, I'm going to stick with you for a second because this is most relevant. You'll see the most activity on this supply chain constraints. There's huge demand on networks, it's huge demand on equipment, data centers. Just give us a picture of kind of how that's impacting your business from a manufacturing perspective.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
I think it's front and center. It's very reminiscent of COVID in a lot of ways in terms of supply chain challenges, although the motivation is very different. I think in COVID we had people consuming network equipment like they would consume toilet paper, and that was wasn't based on real demand. This is all growing very, very fast. The demand is real. The change is that these technologies have never been this big. We've never seen technologies go from chip to a shipping product so fast. We've never seen the ramp happen so fast. We issue a purchase order to some of our suppliers, and the analysts are behind in terms of estimating how fast the network is growing. And our suppliers think that we're assuming that we're going to be more than 100% of the market, when our expectation, based on everything we know with our customers, is that we'll be less than a third of the market. But still, they have this kind of lagging forecast of what's changing. So it puts a lot of pressure on ASICs. It puts a lot of pressure on ceramics. Technologies where the lead times can become very long, especially where they've trended with, again, ceramics, with 3.5 materials, with ASIC materials, even PCBs, right? It's just exploding in a way that we really have to get ahead of it. We have to convince analysts to see the market differently. A lot of times we're introducing customers to the analysts to help them understand what this next wave is really going to look like. And you have to invest a lot in order to meet the demand. Just to put a couple of numbers into perspective, we expect that in 2026 we're going to scale our line systems by more than 4x, right? So more than 4x of fibers will be lit, and that's probably underestimated. We also expect that in the next couple of years we're going to see millions of coherent interfaces. And it wasn't long ago we were talking about just hundreds of thousands. So it's really grown by an order of magnitude, and potentially 2 times an order of magnitude.
Don, let me move over to you on just huge demand, and then David, we want to talk about kind of how you guys are dealing with these constraints, setting customer expectations. The demand is so enormous, but everybody wants it delivered tomorrow. Equipment challenges, buzzways, ladder racking, just fundamental makeup of data centers, and we're having a lot of problems with those.
Yeah. I think from the COVID on the data center proper, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, we've seen that supply chain start to normalize, become predictable. I think it's kind of forced us to get better at forecasting and outlook over multiple years, so that's a little bit different, I think, for all of us. But now I think it's the supply chain issues moving more now into the electrical grid, right? Where upgrades that need to happen to deliver, hundreds of megawatts to a piece of dirt, that didn't happen a lot in the past, and now that's driving, conductor increases in the carrying capacity of the transmission lines, et cetera, and those components don't exist, right? So now the problem shifted there, which I think requires a lot more diligence up front, specifically on the grid. And then I think ultimately you'll start to see inside the data center, it'll be more the tenant's problem, our customer's problem, but you'll start to see problems with, with all this AI, if you read the paper, you see memory is the next big challenge, right? I mean, memory is going to become extremely scarce and very, very, very expensive. So, I mean, that's already happening. So I think the problem shifts, right? With, as you can expect in a highly dynamic, exploding environment like this with regard to demand.
David, same for you, but just you're moving into new markets. It's a big push for you.
Yeah.
Maybe talk a little bit about that.
So just to get back to the long lead, there's lots of components, and I think you just have to have a focus on that and not take your eye off the ball, because X number of manufacturers need to participate. You need to have very good capacity planning with your customers. I think it all comes back to something that we're all seeing, which is the GPUs, once they're allocated, nobody wants them sitting on the shipping dock or waiting to be deployed. They want to turn that into tokens and turn that into cash. And ultimately, if you have a delay, that's a cost to the customer, even though we see it in front of us. So I think it's getting everyone together to understand how and when are those chips arriving. How do you deploy? I think the final point on that is we used to see ramps over a couple of years. Now everybody wants 100,000 cluster day one. So there's a lot of work, there's a lot of effort, there's a lot of focus on delivery to get those tokens, to market fast. In terms of us going into Asia, yeah, we believe we have great opportunity there. Asia is a very fast-growing market, different parts, different growth, and I think there is swing capacity happening across the region, whether that's in Malaysia, Indonesia, even in Korea and Thailand. We want to participate where we see those opportunities. I think if there's access to power and those countries allow systems to be run and foreign companies to provide service, then it's a good opportunity for us and the industry, because I think 10, 20 years ago, there was not the same level of activity in Asia for data center growth. Then you have a lot happening across Southeast Asia, China, servicing some of those markets as well, out of Southeast Asia.
Thank you. Leigh, you operate in some major markets and obviously have some demanding customers. How do you deal with the supply chain? I mean, obviously you have somebody sitting next to you can help you from an optical gear.
That's right.
But what else is from a supply chain? What's challenging? How is that being?
I think it was mentioned forecasting, becoming really good at forecasting. I think all of us have to be, and I think that started with COVID, right? And I think that's going to continue. I think one interesting element with the pace of changes, and this is sort of more in the tactics, but how you deal with contracts has to change, right? The technology is changing so quickly, and the software is changing so quickly. It's not unheard of by the time you sign the contract. It's changed, and revisions have changed. So making sure that you've structured contracts appropriately for the need in the future is a real thing. So maybe plug the contract into AI, and it'll help you out.
Exactly.
But no, the environment is changing. Just making sure you're well ahead of things is becoming critical.
You bring up a really good point. I mean, the contract terms can potentially impinge upon this group's ability to hit the targets from the customers, and there's some fairly significant penalties.
Yeah.
So I think the structure of the agreement going forward is going to have to be, and ideally, hopefully nobody gets upset about this, but there's going to have to be some movement on the other side, not on the supplier side, on the customer side, to understand, the potential balance.
Yeah, you can't have speed and scale in the same way of operating.
100%.
Whether that's the connectivity, the data center, or even the deployment. It's just a different environment and a different scale. So how do you balance that? You make a valid point. I don't have the answer, but we have to be examining it.
Correct.
As an industry.
Correct. Ron, we have a couple minutes left, but I want to get a final thought from everybody. Just kind of, as we see this going forward, there's been dramatic change over the last, 18 months has been fairly significant. I think everybody's here would love to hear about kind of where are we going, where do you see, and I want to get everybody's perspective, from the next 18, and I don't think we can go beyond 18 months. It's really tricky. I would even maybe, say, hey, let's caveat that to say 12 months. And I think there'd be some pretty, I really enjoy coming to PTC because I think we learn the trends and we also kind of see, hey, what foresight is coming out. So maybe I'll start with you, Ron.
Yeah, maybe one top of mind thing for me from a equipment development perspective is, it used to be that we had big customers, 800-pound gorillas that got together and decided that they wanted to converge on a product that they wanted to drive across the industry. We're not seeing that so much anymore. We're seeing much bigger gorillas, 2,000-pound gorillas, that are coming towards us and asking for bespoke solutions that have the buying power to justify it. And we're seeing that across all of the hyperscalers in such a way that it's creating a lot of, if you want to participate in that hyperscaler, you have to say yes, you have to engage. Very difficult to converge on a single product. What that means, I think, is for the average consumer, I think there's a lot of choices that it creates. There's a lot of innovation that's going into the space, but for me, building one DSP is not enough. Building two DSPs is not enough. I have to build multiple, 3, 4 DSPs in parallel in order to really have the right product at the right time in the future, because the pace is also moving fast. I also have to have variants of different ways of engaging with our platforms. Some want network management, some want a full system to look like one API, some want every line card to look like an API. So there's a lot of bespoke things that are happening. So we have to get much better at testing. We have to get much better at leveraging this modern tooling that we have to do development. We have to get much better at qualifying these products in such a way that if we leverage our old ways of doing things to apply to the new paradigm, we will never move fast enough. So it's fortunate to have a very large team to be able to do that, but it's also quite complex, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think there's not a lot of motivation to make the different hyperscalers work together and force a common structure, even though we work very hard in standards bodies to try to do that. It's something that just generates a lot of technical debt.
Thanks. Don, do you want to jump in? Final thought?
I think a lot of the discussion is around these large campuses and training, and obviously I think the next wave starts to push things more and more, or kind of a resurgence to the edge, which would be the inference, right? The interaction with these models that once they get built and they continue to, of course, will evolve, but I think as more and more applications that become relevant that want to take advantage of the augmentation of a large model to fit into applications, it's only natural it'll go to the. I hear a lot of people say latency doesn't matter. I think that's a little bit premature right now.
Leigh?
I think for us in the network, the next 18 months is, and somebody said transparency and automation, and making sure that we're investing in a few areas, taking friction out of the process in the network, making sure that we, honestly, clean house and clean our own data, clean our own back office systems to allow the automation to work. But I think that's what customers are going to insist more and more of, is that kind of transparency and automation. Whether honestly you're an enterprise customer, a massive carrier, or you're a consumer, that's what you're going to want. You're going to want that kind of visibility and automation in the network. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think that's where the focus will be, to be able to use some of the newer tools and software that's coming out. So.
Dave?
I'll be quick. We have to be bold, and I think you would see it at scale. The game used to be there were 3 buyers that would buy a lot. Then there was the 4th up there. And then all of a sudden, I've had conversations with the majors say, you're now competing with 4 new players who weren't, and they're bold. They'll take 100, and maybe they're different credit ratings, and all that goes into the discussion. But the pendulum has swung a little. So I think the next 12 months, we're going to see that to either become bigger or they'll peter out a little. But I think there's competitive tension for the same power and space from more players on a global level. So that's a great opportunity, but we have to determine how to play that game.
Awesome. Thank you all. This was incredible. Appreciate all the knowledge here, and look forward to the next panel. Thanks so much, everybody.